Welcome everyone. Good morning to all of you from all across Canada. And I look forward to a very interesting and engaging webinar about long stay holidays. So I want to start out by saying this webinar in particular, as different from when we launch some of our new trips, is really an audience participation webinar. So I encourage you to ask questions, make comments. I will be monitoring the chat box as well as my colleagues, Paula and Joel. And so we want to make sure we get your input on the various subjects that we talk about, because this notion of long stays, I've done them before. I've organized them before for people. I've hosted them. So I am familiar with how they are done. I'm familiar with they're done by different companies. But this is Wheel and Anchor, and we are not like any other company. And so what we're trying to design is something here that sort of addresses as many as our members' wishes as possible. So anyway, without further ado, let's get right into it. For those of you who are new to Wheel and Anchor or whom have not participated in our webinars before, we are all about bringing travelers together. So what a perfect context for long stay holidays, because this is a classic example of we want to encourage people to travel as if you were traveling with a group of friends, that is really our mantra, is bringing like-minded people, like-minded from the perspective of how we relate to traveling the world and how we relate to learning about new traditions and cultures and people from all over the world. That's what we all have in common as members of Wheel and Anchor. And that's our job, is to bring you all together for some really amazing experiences, both not far from home or far from home, as the case may be. My personal mission for everyone is that each and every one of our members becomes well-traveled and well-connected. And connected, of course, to one another as travelers, because the more that, think about all of your travelers' friends and the stories that you share that inspires you to travel, but it also inspires, in conjunction with just being well-traveled, a greater understanding of the world and all the people that live in it. I mean, it's a lofty goal, but I think that, all of us would likely agree that, the more well-traveled we are, the more that we have an understanding for humanity at large. And I think that is very beneficial, particularly in the times that we live in now, even though, of course, we can't travel at the moment. Okay, so joining me this morning are my colleagues, Paula Zarnik. She is our senior trip specialist. Most likely, if you call into our office, that's who you will reach, is Paula. She's on our front lines and a wonderful part of our team. And my right-hand man, my co-founder, and provides our technical support and does our marketing, is Joel Curry. And he's dialing in from Taiwan, and I'm in Thailand, for those of you who aren't aware. Still in Thailand, stuck in Thailand, intentionally stuck, let's put it this way. It's a good place to be. Let's first of all talk a little bit about what is a typical long stay holiday. What does it consist of? Well, I think for many of you, you'll know exactly what it means. It's basically going to one place and spending a longer period of time there. And when I say a longer period of time, we're usually talking a minimum of 3 or 4 weeks. In some cases, long stay holidays can be 5, 6, or 7 weeks. And they are most often done during our colder months in Canada, so sort of between November and March. And long stay holidays, you'll find them featured frequently to places like the south of Spain, so the Costa del Sol, the Costa Brava, or the Algarve in Portugal, but also to Central America. And of course, the traditional ones, but we're not really talking about, going to Florida or Arizona. I mean, people go down there, snowbirds and so on, but we're really talking about going overseas, or Central America, of course, is one of our topics. Usually you'll stay in sort of self-catering type units or holiday apartments or apart hotels. They all have different names for them, but where you have something a little bit bigger than a hotel room. If you're going to spend 3 or 4 weeks in one place, it's nice to have a little bit of extra room, a little sitting area, maybe a little kitchenette. That's typically what's done, so that it's almost like having a mini apartment. I mentioned some of the destinations. Then this is where it starts to differ between various companies in terms of what is actually offered, because some companies will, simply sort of arrange a bunch of accommodation for people, and they'll send you over, plop you there, and they have a local rep. But there's not very much in the way of programming. I mean, they'll offer some optional tours that you can buy. But otherwise, you've got your accommodation, you've got breakfast, and you're in a lovely place, and that's about it. Other companies are a little bit more proactive in terms of, having a set number of excursions sort of built into the itinerary, and perhaps even a host or escort that comes along with the group from Canada. So that is sort of, for depending on where you look, there are different ways to sort of shake this. Our vision for long stays incorporates sort of the basic fundamentals of this, but in my idea, because we are a community of people who by and large enjoy each other's company. I mean, I think that's I've been talking to a lot of our members over the last weeks, and many have given me video testimonials. We're going to be releasing a new video about that shortly, and people comment on how enjoyable it is to meet the other people in the community. And so the social aspect of it is, if you think about going and traveling to, let's say Madeira in Portugal, or someplace that is, unfamiliar to you. If you go on your own, or with your spouse or your traveling partner, you will enjoy each other's company to a point. You'll meet other people, but you might not necessarily feel as comfortable sort of branching out. If you went with a group of friends, you're more likely, is in my experience, to undertake different activities and so on. So our idea is to make it a cultural experience, but also a social experience. So we actually have a lot of fun without compelling you to eat together with the group every single day. I mean, nobody wants that either. We all want our space, but we want to know that there's other people there that we can go and have a good time with, whether it's just going out for a night of cards, or a night of bingo, or whatever activity happens to be in that town. Or it might just be going out for dinner, or all the different activities. So our idea is to kind of almost like, and this is the utopian version, being on a cruise ship, where the list of activities is this long. I mean, that's also difficult to achieve logistically, but that's kind of how we envision it, is that there's no shortage of things to do, or you can relax and do nothing. So that's the vision that we have for long stay holidays at Wheel and Anchor. Let me start off, though, before we talk about some of the destinations and before I get some of your feedback. I would like to get some input from you. And so we've got a couple of questions where there is a poll. So the first question is, and so if you could give us your answer on this, how long would you stay in a long stay holiday? I did ask this question in one of our newsletters, in one of our polls of the week, but if you could think for a minute. And again, we're not tracking this. I mean, we're obviously keeping record of what the statistics are, because this helps us plan. But I'm curious, how long would you stay on a long stay holiday? So how long would you be comfortable going away from home to stay in another country? Around 3 weeks, or more like a month, a little over a month? Or are you one of those people that would go, yeah, I'd actually go away for the better part of 2 months? So give some thought to that. Around 3 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks. Of course, Ellen makes a good point. It depends where it is. That's given, right? So I think the point of this question is really almost more like, how far would you be comfortable being away from home? Because as you say, if you're going to travel around the world to New Zealand isn't one of the ones we're talking about, but I think a lot of people would really seriously consider going for a good part of the winter for a couple of months. The next question that we have is, and thank you for your answers, we will give the responses actually in the newsletter, because the way that our webinar software works, we can't actually give you the results instantaneously, but I promise we will email them to you, and they'll be published in our newsletter. So you get a sense of what everybody else is thinking about it. The second question is, what climate is important to you? So if you're thinking about a long stay holiday, now we are talking about travel in the colder months, which is not to say that we're ruling out long stay holidays during the other months of the year. We're not ruling them out at all. But assuming now in the time period from November to April, which is when most people will think about going away for a prolonged period of time, what would be your preferred climate? Would you prefer like a warm tropical climate So if you think about climate-wise, like the Caribbean or Mexico, not those destinations specifically, but like warm to hot weather, or would you like it just more like warm, like you'd find in, you know, sort of like South Carolina or Florida or northern Florida in February kind of thing, or you're good with mild, so 14 to 20 degrees Celsius, where so yeah, you don't really care if it's that warm as long. And finally, weather doesn't matter as long as it's nicer than it is in Canada, as long as it's not winter. So if you have a preference of one of those, again, would be interesting to hear what people think is important to them in terms of getting away during November to April. So once we've got all or the majority of people's answers on that, we have, do we have one more question, Joel, or did we eliminate the last question? No, I think we're moving right on. No, we're moving right on. So that's it, no more questions. If you have questions, of course, please type them in the chat box. Oh, I see some questions have popped in. Warm to hot, no snow. Thank you, Fran. Yes, indeed. I think that goes without saying for most of us, myself included. If you're going to go away in the wintertime, yeah, we don't need to see snow. So we're not going to make you go cross-country skiing in Sweden or something like that. All right, we're going to talk about 4 destinations today. So the 4th one is a bit of a surprise. I did mention in our newsletter in the lead up to this webinar that we'd be talking about 3. So we're going to be talking about Madeira, Costa Rica, and Thailand. So really quite different destinations. And then a 4th one, which I'll tell you at the very end. And I'm going to be giving you a little bit of an overview. This is no details at all, so we don't have a finished program, but about what you could expect in each of these destinations. And so that's the idea here. So the first one that we're going to talk about is Madeira. Madeira, of course, is an island, a volcanic island, much like the Azores. It's south of the Azores, so it's geographically off the coast of Morocco. So if you go from Morocco due west, you'll end up in Madeira. And it's a spectacularly beautiful island because it was formed from volcanoes. In the winter time, so again, January to March, you're talking about mildish weather. So it sort of averages during the day in the high teens. But it typically doesn't drop much below about 14 degrees. And it's generally quite sunny. So you get about, you get once every 3 days or so, you'll get a little bit of rain. So it's quite a lovely climate, but it's not warm or hot. And where you would stay in Madeira, it's not a terribly big island. It's like about 50 some odd kilometers end to end. So the beautiful thing about a place like Madeira is that you can, by staying in one place, you can drive around and see all that there is to see from one stop. And the most logical place to be in Madeira is in Funchal, in the capital. And Funchal is has an old town, and it's quite a large city in the meantime. But there is a beautiful area down on the coast, sort of between what they call the Lido and the old town itself, where you can find some lovely sort of apartment hotel types things where you could even walk into the old town. So you'd be talking about, 20, 30-minute walk. Taxis are relatively inexpensive. They even have Uber in Madeira. And while staying there, again, because you're in close to a fairly large city, there is any number of places you can stroll around, neighborhoods, sort of shopping districts. I mean, we're not talking about a major city like a London or New York, obviously, but it's really quite charming. And Madeira obviously is Portugal, so the Portuguese, much like the flair that you have there. The other thing about Madeira, I think it's all really about walking. Because as I said, there is spectacular scenery from all these volcanic mountains. And there are definitely more challenging hikes, But the beautiful thing about Madeira is they have what they call the levadas, which are walking trails that go along these irrigation channels that were built a long, long time ago. And so it means that because they're irrigation channels, the level of incline is not very great. So you can have these wonderful walks in all different parts of the island, taking in some beautiful flora and fauna. And of course, you almost always have a view of the Atlantic Ocean around. So it's quite spectacular. They have botanical gardens because, again, of this temperate climate. You've got these amazing gardens all over the place. And as I say, Madeira, much like the Azores, for example, is all about views because it's an island. So you're always looking out to the ocean, and the Atlantic Ocean is a wonderful cobalt blue. There's interesting local products that you can sort of acquire there. Madeira is, among other things, famous for Madeira wine, which is a fortified port type wine. Here's a picture of some of these botanical gardens that are, as I say, really all over the island. And so if you are into gardens, you can find them almost everywhere. We would take excursions. So my idea for a place like Madeira is to go from Funchal out to there's no part of the island that is more than a 2-hour drive. So everything is a day trip. So I easily envision that we would do at least twice or even 3 times a week. We would take a day trip out to visit these little towns and communities, do wine tasting. People like the idea of little cooking courses or to understand how they make this Madeira wine, for example. It's a truly charming place to visit. You can easily see how you would spend a month here. The food in Madeira is, obviously they have a lot of fish and seafood on the menu. They do their shish kebabs, which is one of the famous local dishes. The pastries like the pastel de nata, for those of you who know the little custard cups they make in Portugal. Oh my God, I could eat a dozen of them. And prices are, I would say, reasonable. I wouldn't say it's cheap. It's less expensive than eating out in Canada if you go to a typical restaurant. Beer and wine is, I would say, less expensive than we're accustomed to at home. Portuguese food is just great. They have, like in any of the destinations we're talking about, quite a number of international restaurants. So it's not like you have to eat Portuguese and fish and seafood every night. You really can get just about everything. Madeira is very popular in the summertime for people traveling for a week's holiday from the UK and from Spain and so on and so forth. The appealing thing in the wintertime is that it's quite reasonably priced because it is their off season, even though the weather is still quite nice and mild, as you can see it here. Madeira isn't a big beach destination. There are some beaches there. That's why people do fly down from the UK and other parts of mainland Europe. So you could expect that for roughly a 4-week program where you had sort of breakfast each day and then 3 or 4 meals together as a group. And when I say as a group, I don't, as many of you know, I'm against the philosophy of sort of all going to, group dining halls and, buffets and all that stuff. I rather sort of do more of a dine around type program where you have different selected restaurants and then you can go out in groups of 4 or 6 or however many people and explore different restaurants around. Probably for the Lancome portion of the tour for about a month's stay, you'd be probably looking in around the $4,000 range. These are guesstimates based on the research we've done so far. Again, the idea is that we're trying to get some sort of feedback. So that is my synopsis of Madeira. I think it's a lovely spot. It's relatively easy to get to. So you typically would fly via Lisbon to get to Madeira. Unfortunately, we don't have nonstop flights from Canada because there isn't that much traffic from between Canada and Madeira. Call it about $1,000 from Toronto, from the eastern side of Canada. Out in the west, it's as you can imagine, it's a little bit more. At the moment, the fares are dirt cheap, but airfares anywhere you really can't. The prices now are not really a guideline for the future because there's so many unknowns with the pandemic and so on. It's not a short trip. It's about 14 to 16 hours. That's including the layover. So you're looking at about a 7.5-hour flight to Lisbon, probably a couple of hours layover, and then a couple hours flight on from there is what you'd be looking at. So and they have some neat stopover programs with TAP Air Portugal. There are other ways to get to Funchal, to Madeira as well, but this would be the most common. So this is what you'd be looking at. So if anybody has any comments or questions about it, then so Ardell asked, for example, are the cost of meals included? So what we would do on a long stay is, as I mentioned here, is that typically you would have your breakfast included, and then we would generally have, not every day, but 3 or 4 days a week, we would have a lunch or a dinner included. And usually, like in a lot of these places, one of those meals is big enough that, if you're going to have a third meal in the day, it'd probably just be a little sandwich or a pastry. My experience from our members is that 3 full meals a day is just frankly too much food. And so in compiling any of these programs, what we would do is we would tell you, here's what's included, and here's what the average cost of your other meals is likely to be, so that you can get a sense of a budget for yourself of what you would have to spend. Okay? Does anybody else have any thoughts about Madeira? You can sort of run this through your head. We don't need answers right now. Oh, I had a question here. Mike asked about how I would compare Madeira to the Algarve. Good question. First of all, it's warmer. So the Algarve in the wintertime is definitely a few degrees cooler than this. It's a popular destination. A lot of long stay programs go to the Algarve, frankly, because they have tons of hotels that are empty in the wintertime. And so they are cheap as chips, and tour companies come in and buy them up very inexpensively and send people down to the Algarve. It's nice, but the Algarve, a lot of the towns in the Algarve are truly summer destinations, and they are dead in the wintertime. Funchal is a functioning year-round city. So that is a little bit the difference, is that there's a sort of a liveliness, and there's something going on all the time. And that's part of the reason why, I like to look at places that, these other companies aren't going to, because I understand the rationale for going there, and not to say that they're not nice places, but for me, it's more about having an experience of a culture, not just getting away from the cold weather. If you want to just get away from the cold weather, then you got lots of options. Anyway, let's move on. Please bring cultural activities. So Ellen brought up the question. Absolutely. This is the whole idea, is that the programming in any of these destinations would involve us doing cultural activities, even doing things like, visiting a school to the extent that was possible, which I'm sure it's possible. Anything's possible. And getting a little bit greater insight into how people live. So consider it as well the potential for a cultural immersion, as opposed to just a holiday where you're sort of sitting on a beach or sitting with your feet up. That's how we're planning to orchestrate these kind of trips. And you'll see from the different destinations that some lend themselves to being more cultural than others, as you'll see in a moment, as we move on to our next destination. So the next destination that we are talking about, Joel, is Koh Samui. So this is Thailand. So Thailand, completely different experience than a Madeira, for example. And so let me give you a little bit of insight about it. So Koh Samui here, and the map is a few slides later, is an island. I'm very close by. I'm on the island next to Koh Samui, is where I'm sitting right now, in the Gulf of Thailand, so about 600 kilometers due south of Bangkok. And we're in this body of water called the Gulf of Thailand. So it's an island that is it's smaller than a Madeira. It's only about 30 kilometers across, so it's about half the size of Madeira. And it's warm. We're in the tropical belt here. In January, February, March, it's in the high 20s or early 30s during the day, and it's relatively humid. So it's warm. Like, you want to get away from winter, this is a place to come. What's it like in Thailand? I mean, I think, I'm a little bit biased because I live here for part of the year. So for me, this is like home. But I think a lot of people sort of envision, the temples. I mean, Thailand is a very Buddhist country. and a lot of this sort of cultural and religious icons. But this part of Thailand is, for many people in Europe and in Asia, is a sun destination. So Koh Samui is like Florida or Mexico, to be very blunt in my analogies. You have beautiful beaches like you see here in Fisherman's Village on the north coast of Koh Samui. So being an island like Madeira, there's a number of things that we can do on the island. They have some beautiful waterfalls. You can do here some cultural experiences like cooking classes, for example. Thai food, you've probably all sampled, is really, really good. It doesn't always have to be super spicy. I know it's often associated with being super spicy, but frankly, almost most of the dishes that you will find can be made without a lot of spice. There's some wonderful sites here in this tropical belt. There's the THONG Marine Park, which is this magnificent archipelago of islands that's about an hour boat ride from here. That is a popular sort of destination to just see these wonderful geological features and do snorkeling and bounce around in the turquoise waters. They've got waterfalls on this island that are wonderful for hiking up to. Not a super difficult walk. There's a myriad of other sort of activities. They have a golf course even on Koh Samui. You can visit the island that I'm on here, which is called Koh Phangan, which is even more natural beauty and forest, and some lovely beach resorts. The other interesting thing about Koh Samui, so the experience there would be different than a Madeira or the other destination I'll talk about, because although there are cultural things to do, this is really about getting away from the cold. Because you're mostly what you're going to do is look at, you're going to visit places like Khao Sok National Park, which is a couple hours drive away from Koh Samui on the mainland. Spectacular reservoir that was filled up and created some of this most incredible scenery. And you can go kayaking and canoeing, and you can visit these wonderful how shall I say, sites to visit, and it's all warm, and the food is really good. What you don't have in a place like Koh Samui is you can walk along the beaches, and they have spectacular beaches. I mean, white sand, it's just like right out of a picture book. But as opposed to a place like Madeira, you don't have as many of the walking trails and so on. You are reliant somewhat on taxis and local transport to sort of get you from A to B, because of the way that these islands have been sort of laid out. They don't do a lot of walking here. The weather's too warm. A big advantage, though, to coming to a place like Koh Samui, for example, is that it has an international airport on it. So this little island has an airport, and you can do hub and spoke trips, which you wouldn't do in a place like Madeira, because you're off in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The only place you could fly to close by relatively is like the Azores. But from Koh Samui, you can fly to Singapore for the weekend. The flight is not even an hour. You can fly up to Chiang Mai in northern Thailand. You see a picture at the bottom left. You can fly to Kuala Lumpur, the capital of Malaysia. So there's a number of places that you can visit on relatively quick hops. So, you came to Thailand for a month, and you relaxed in the sunshine and the beaches, and, you soaked up the warm weather, but you can actually go away for a couple of days and visit some of these other interesting cities to get sort of a cultural fill that you wouldn't find in Koh Samui itself. Because, again, picture going to, again, maybe it's not the best analogy, but like a Cancun or going to a Jamaica. It's the beach resort kind of experience. I think it is definitely a lot more cultural than those kind of places. And again, warm weather, lovely. So this is what Thailand is all about. As I said, the food, Thai food speaks for itself. Needless to say, being an island, we have a lot of delicious seafood here. Big benefit to Thailand. Part of the reason that I'm here is that once you're here, it's very inexpensive. So eating out at local restaurants is, I can go to a restaurant here, and for less than $10, I am stuffed to the gills. Canadian dollars, I'm talking Canadian dollars. Beer is relatively inexpensive as well. certainly compared to home. The only thing that is more money in Thailand, because the local people don't drink it, is wine. Wine is imported and has high import duty. So it's wine in Thailand are, you can get wine here, but you pay a little bit of a premium for it. So the thing about Thailand is that, of course, the winter months, January, February, March, are high season here, as you can well imagine. People coming from the rest of Asia, northern parts of Asia, Europe, come here for much like we would go to the Caribbean or Mexico. And so it's high season. And so even though Thailand is a relatively inexpensive destination, it makes it more expensive because if you come in, let's say February, you're really in the middle of the high season. So you would expect for a land program here, it would be more than a place like Madeira. You're probably looking at probably more like $400 to $4,500 to stay for a month, with again 3 to 4 meals a week together. The bonus being that, as I said, you can eat out very inexpensively in Thailand, and then we would have a bunch of more local excursions. But then we would have these hub and spoke ideas. So fly to Singapore for the weekend. I mean that comes with some expense. Singapore is very expensive compared to Thailand. But for a lot of people who might not otherwise find themselves for a prolonged period in this part of the world, it's an interesting way to explore these cities and then still come back to your home base, as it were. The accommodation in Thailand would be, again, similar to Madeira. You'd probably find these holiday apartments that have a little kitchen, like a studio apartment with a kitchen, maybe a 1-bedroom type thing. And that's pretty much Thailand. Getting there, obviously, Thailand is the furthest of the destinations. If you're going for a month, it's not so bad, but let's be honest, from Toronto to get to Koh Samui, you can fly to Hong Kong nonstop and then right to Koh Samui from there, but you're still talking about 22, 24 hours of travel time. It's a bit of a trek, let's face it. From Vancouver, it's a bit shorter, of course, because we're on the west coast of Canada, but again, the nice thing is about a place like Koh Samui is it does have an international airport, and you can get direct flights right from Hong Kong. So that makes it a little bit easier. All right, any questions? Yeah, Paula says she loves the food in Thailand. I love the food in Thailand too. There's a lot of things I like about Thailand. If you have any questions, thoughts about that, we will poll you at the end to let you know what you thought about these different places, because I'm curious for your feedback. Is this the kind of place you could envision yourself going? There's probably a million more questions that you have. Joel commented here, he actually lived in Koh Samui for a few years, thoroughly enjoyed it. And it's a special place. There's no two ways around it. Okay, good. Let us move on to our third destination that we mentioned that I told you about before, which is Costa Rica. So Costa Rica is in a similar vein to Koh Samui in that we're talking about a tropical destination. And so the weather, obviously, in January and February, well, the weather in Costa Rica all year round is warm. So in Costa Rica, though, is defined by really two different climate zones. One is the Central Valley. So this is the part north of San Jose, the capital, where because it's in the inland and it's a little bit higher in elevation, of course, they have volcanoes throughout Costa Rica. The weather is a little bit more temperate. So it's January to March, it ranges, it cools off in the evening to below 20 often, and during the day it gets up to around 30. On the coast, it's quite hot. So it generally, your daytime temperatures are in the low 30s. So similar climate profile to what you'll find in like a Koh Samui in Thailand. As far as where you'd stay, well, as I say, we're looking at Costa Rica in a couple of different ways. A lot of people have actually retired down to Thailand and taken up residence in what they call the Central Valley. So this is the highlands because you want to be in a warm climate, and you want to have things to do close by. I mean, San Jose itself actually has quite a number of sort of interesting cultural things to visit. But Costa Rica is really about the nature, the flora, the fauna, the volcanoes, the rainforest, the cloud forest that they have there, which is really quite world famous because it has a diversity of as flora and fauna, as I say, that you'll find like almost nowhere else on the planet. And that is really the big appeal to Costa Rica. We would likely stay either on the northwest coast. So this is the area around Tamarindo. The airport there is Liberia. So a lot of people will fly for a week's holiday to the coast around Tamarindo. Here you have big long beaches. The terrain is quite flat. I wouldn't say it's super scenic. I mean, it's beach coastline, so it's very nice that way. You have to go inland to get into the sort of more of the jungle type atmosphere, but there are numerous towns along the Pacific coast that we could stay in, and we've looked at others. And one of our colleagues actually has a residence not about an hour away from Tamarindo. On the other side, you have the Caribbean coast. So that actually the Pacific coast is all black volcanic sand, or it's very dark colored sand. On the Caribbean side of Costa Rica, it's all white sand, like you would see elsewhere in the Caribbean, and the palm trees and very lush vegetation. Here you are a little bit further away. So you have beautiful beaches and beautiful water. You're further away from some of the other national parks, but not super far away. There's still lots of things that you can do on day excursions from the Caribbean coast on the east side of it. And then, as I mentioned, the Central Valley, which is right in the middle, but then you don't have the beaches, so you need a place with a swimming pool. Things to do, as I mentioned, the Arenal volcano is probably the most famous volcano in Costa Rica. You see a picture of it here. There are numerous other ones. National parks like Manuel Antonio, like Tortuguera. There's so many of them. And this would really be the focus of the stay. There are definitely cultural things that we can do with the local Aboriginal tribes that have been their offshoots of like the Aztecs from Mexico or the Incas. There's various tribes that have been around for obviously a long time, and that's the type of thing that we can visit as well. But the emphasis again is really on nature. Food in Costa Rica, again, similar to what you'll find in Mexico and in Peru, this Latin American, there's a lot of rice and beans. You get a lot of chicken and lamb, of course, on the coastline, fish and seafood, delicious food. But again, because you're talking about tourist type areas on the coast, you've got any range of international restaurants. Pricing wise, that's a little more expensive. Prices here are, actually, this is a bit of a typo. They're more like Canada. So you're probably talking about main courses in local restaurants, probably in the $20 to $25 range. Beer is a little bit less expensive at home, but wine, again, it's a little bit pricier because it's not as commonly drank as a local drink. Mostly they drink locally their local distilled spirits or beer. So it's more expensive for going out and so on, as you'll find, for example, in Madeira or in Koh Samui. Overall, as a destination, I mean, I think one of the big benefits to Costa Rica is that it's close by, right? You can fly into San Jose nonstop from Toronto, nonstop from Vancouver, and probably some other cities in Canada. So it's fairly easy to get to. Because it is high season and Costa Rica is quite a popular destination, the prices are higher. So you're probably looking at, for a month stay, in and around the $4,500 to $5,500 range. Maybe a little better than that. Again, we're sort of gauging interest, but it's a beautiful destination. Jean confirms it here. She highly, highly recommends Costa Rica. It's a wonderful place to spend the winter, and lots of Canadians do. And as per the other things, we would probably include roughly 6 excursions during the course of a month, and then we'd organize lots of other ones. The key here for us is finding a place where there's enough things to do in relatively close proximity, so we don't have to, get in a car or a bus and travel halfway across the country every time we want to do something. So that's what we're looking at for Costa Rica. Paula confirms, you have a very, very lush landscape here, yeah, lots of adventure. I mean, if you really want to experience some of the most amazing rainforests, then this is the place to go. Pricing wise, in terms of flying there, yeah, $800-900 out of Toronto, Vancouver, roughly the same. We have nonstop flights in there. At the moment, you can fly there very inexpensively, but of course, again, as I mentioned before, that's just a function of the um, volatility of the airfare market given the pandemic. All right, good. So any other comments, questions about Costa Rica? I'm looking forward to getting your input at the end on what you think of this as a destination. I'm very curious to see what kind of feedback we get. Okay, so moving on to our surprise destination. And this one that came up with as a result of conversations I had with a number of friends I have that have been here or who reside here. This is Cyprus. So I'm curious what comes up in your mind when you think about Cyprus. It might be the fact that, you know, Canadians had a peacekeeping force there for literally decades because of the Cyprus is a divided island. The north part of the Cyprus is claimed by Turkey, although that's not recognized by most countries in the UN, and the south part of the island is Greek. That conflict is pretty stable, actually. So you drive back and forth across the island with no sort of issues at all. So it's not really. It was an issue up till maybe 10 years ago, but it's not been an issue for a long time. And Cyprus is truly a magical island. It is most popular in the summertime. Of course, a lot of people fly from Central Europe down to Cyprus because of has spectacular coastline, spectacular beaches, but also a tremendous amount of history and archaeology and so on and so forth. So I thought it's an interesting destination because a lot of people don't think about Cyprus in the wintertime. But one of the nice things is it's one of the sunniest places in Europe. And temperature-wise, it's mild, right? So it's not a tropical destination, let's be clear, right? Similar to Madeira, you're talking about temperatures sort of in the mid to high teens is typical. It's a good friend of mine has a home in Cyprus, and she basically said you can almost guarantee it's going to be 18 degrees every day in January, February, March. That's kind of like consistent, and it's sunny most of the time. It does rain. It is the rainier time of the year, but as you will see from the pictures, it's a very dry environment. So it's mild. The beautiful thing about Cyprus, and we would stay probably in the very eastern part of the island. This is the city of Limassol, which is the largest city on Cyprus. It's not the capital, which is Nicosia, one of the places that we visit. But in Cyprus, you would go and stay on the east coast in a place called Protaras, which is very near a protected area called Cape Greco. And you have amazing coastline, and you have literally, you couldn't walk in a month all of the walking trails that they have in this area. It's very, very well set up for walking around. And I think that in talking to a few people about, you know, what they see as one of their priorities is the ability to walk around. And I think Cyprus has all of that. There are numerous places to visit around the island. Nicosia is, of course, the capital, which sits right on the border between North and South Cyprus, is truly a charming city. Museums, archaeological sites, everything that you would expect from any of these older cities in Europe. And as I mentioned, the coastal trails, and there a lot of them here. This looks very, you know, steep and rugged and all the rest of it. They have all of that. They have all levels of hiking trails. But part of the reason for the far eastern coast is the fact that you can do a lot of the terrain is quite flat. So you can walk for, you know, a kilometer. You can walk for 10 kilometers. You don't have to climb up any major mountains or anything like that. We would likely stay right on the beach. So this is the benefit. I've been in contact with a few hotels and apartment hotel type places over there, and they really do have good deals. So you'd have a beautiful sea view while you were there, and you know, at very reasonable prices. Yeah, I could mention the many archaeological sites that are there. Now the food in Cyprus, ooh, wow. So obviously highly influenced by Greek cuisine because it's Greek Cyprus, but also by Turkish cuisine. Personally, I love both Greek and Turkish food. I think it's amazing. And you know, you certainly have a lot of seafood there. But once again, because it is a big tourist destination in the summertime, you have a vast array of restaurants to choose from, and it's quite inexpensive. So this is one of the benefits, I think, to a place like Cyprus, is that you get a lot of bang for your buck. The other thing I want to say about Cyprus is that it is also quite strategic for visiting some neighboring countries and cities that you might not think of. For example, Beirut is just over an hour flight away. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, Beirut, oh my God. Beirut still has this tarnished image. I can tell you from my own personal experience, I've been to Beirut several times. It is one of the most fascinating, intriguing cities in the Middle East. It is this part of town here that you see in the picture has been completely renewed and revitalized since the last war. Lebanon is undergoing its challenges right now. I think we've all read the newspaper, that is for sure. But listen, you can take a return flight from Cyprus over to Beirut if things are calm and relatively stable for about 150 bucks. I mean, it's really quite inexpensive, and you could go and spend a couple of days exploring a little bit of Lebanon, which is very near and dear to my heart. I have been to Lebanon a few times and enjoyed it thoroughly every time. Also close by, which you can't make in the same trip, of course, is Tel Aviv, which is immediately to the south of Beirut. Another amazing city. Those of us that were on our trip to Egypt, Israel, and Jordan this past January, we had a very short stop in Tel Aviv, and I think most people said, wow, I could spend more time here. It's quite a modern city in comparison to Tel Aviv, which is quite an ancient city. Tel Aviv was really only built in the last, since Israel was formed. So it's an intriguing destination that similarly you can get to in just over an hour flight from Cyprus. So some interesting side trips that you could do that you wouldn't normally think of. And to me, this is one of the important parts about this opportunity is that, a month in one place for some people is a long time. And so the ability to hop out and see something different is quite appealing. So talking about dining in Cyprus, as I mentioned, it's really a superb version of Greek food, and it's quite inexpensive. I showed these prices to this friend of mine who lives part of the year in Cyprus. She said, "Oh, it's not that expensive." But you can go out and have a pretty good main course, which often comes with little starters for around 15 bucks Canadian. Beer is cheaper than at home. Wine is quite reasonably priced. I wouldn't call it a budget destination, but you get a lot of value for money in Cyprus, particularly in the off season. And so the other nice thing about Cyprus is overall, again, because they have, we can negotiate quite good deals in the wintertime. I must say a lot of people from the UK, a lot of people from Scandinavia do go to Cyprus. So it's not like it's a ghost town there. So in case anybody had that thinking, there are places in Europe where you wouldn't go because it's really dead. But Cyprus, because it is so sunny all year round, does draw people that do a similar type program from other parts of Europe. But you could go there for a month for probably, in the high threes, 3,500 to 4,000 Canadian dollars, with some meals included, with a bunch of excursions around the island. It's quite interesting. And that's why I wanted to sort of surprise you with this idea of a destination. Jean's comment, history and antiquities. Well, they have all kinds of history and antiquities there. And again, think about mini Athens or something like that. It's all there. Getting there, it's not too bad. So similar to Madeira, you have to make a hop in Europe somewhere. You can travel via Athens. You can travel via Frankfurt. There's a number of different, actually the best connection to get to Cyprus is via Cairo, which is not far away. And Egypt Air, which is an excellent airline, by the way, I flew it in January, has nonstop flights to Cairo, and you can connect right into Larnaca. Vancouver, it's a little bit more of a haul because, of course, you're coming from the west. But if you're going for a month, it's probably quite worth it. So that wraps up my synopsis of the 4 destinations. Thank you for indulging me. We're already 49 minutes in. I'd love to get your thoughts about any of these destinations, any questions that you might have. And now I have some questions for you because, again, as I mentioned, I'm curious to get feedback from everybody on these different destinations. Let me give you a summary again. Madeira, the temperature is climate. You'd be living near Funchal, so a small city. It's all about the mountain scenery. It's not too far away from Canada, and it's a fairly inexpensive destination. The next one we talked about was Koh Samui. It's all about warm tropical weather, beautiful beaches, making side trips to nearby cities. It's moderately expensive only because it is high season, and it's definitely a bit of a trip to get here. The third one we talked about was Costa Rica. Again, warm tropical destination. Likely we'd stay on the coast somewhere not far from a beach. Beautiful beaches and rainforest volcanoes. It's the closest one to Canada, obviously. But again, relatively expensive because we'd be traveling there in the high season. And finally, we talked about Cyprus. And Cyprus has, again, moderate, sunny, mild temperatures in the high teens. We'd be in a small town, a seaside town on the east coast. It has beautiful coastline, wonderful walking trails. There's lots of historical and archaeological and other cultural sites to visit. It's quite inexpensive, and it's moderately long to get there. It's a little more than your average trip to Europe because you have to make that extra hop to get over to Cyprus. So my question now to all of you, thank you for indulging me for the last few minutes. So first of all, of these destinations presented, what do you think sounds most appealing? And so the options that we have are, you can choose one of each, or you can say, I like them all. But if there's one that you sort of sticks out in your mind, like, oh my God, if the opportunity presented itself and there wasn't a pandemic and all the rest of it, which one of these would you choose? So a question that Helen asked a question about health and COVID stays. Maybe you could qualify that question a little bit, Helen, and Ellen, I'll do my best to answer that. Which one of these would you choose? And, you know, if it's like, oh, Madeira and Thailand, or Costa Rica and Thailand, or whatever it happens to be, just choose the one that it's like literally was presented to you on a plate and you said, boom, this is the one I would go to. And again, the reason for my question is that we're seriously contemplating about introducing long stays into our repertoire of programs. We may very well do more than one. We might do a tropical one and a more temperate climate one. We had lots of feedback in our poll and our newsletter about other places we could go. People talked about doing a long stay in Italy in the early spring or in the fall, and doing trips around there. Something that I think we certainly will be giving some thought to. So there's lots of other ideas. We just wanted to start with these four to see what they think. So Ellen is asking about best COVID stats now and health availability. Okay, so I think I am not sure the stats actually for Costa Rica. I must be honest. I don't think as a central, I shouldn't say that. I am not 100% sure. Maybe Joel could check that in the meantime. I can say that Madeira, like the Azores, had some cases, but being isolated on the island, they had it relatively well under control. So their islands they had 97 cases and no deaths in Madeira, for example. So that's pretty good. Thailand as a whole, I can tell you, also managed the situation very well. I mean, we had in Thailand here, I think 8,000 cases in the whole country. Keeping in mind there's 80 million people here, and I think less than 100 deaths, and there are no current cases in Thailand. So Thailand managed it among the best of the Southeast Asian countries, and the health situation in Thailand is top notch. I do everything, all of my health stuff here in Thailand. I don't even bother with Canada because the hospitals are top notch. Madeira in Portugal, I would say they're not as good as in Thailand, but it's still European standard. I mean, I'd say it's still pretty reliable. Cyprus, similarly, European standard, pretty good. Costa Rica, not so sure. I would put it a notch below in terms of, they definitely have private hospitals in Costa Rica. They have clinics in all the towns, but it's perhaps not to a European or a North American level of. So Costa Rica had quite a few cases, 15,000 cases here. Cyprus. Fran's comment, big ship cruising a thing of the past for us. Yeah, I think it is for a lot of people. Yeah, consideration to all of them. Do I think anyone will bring out COVID insurance? There are insurance companies already offering that, but there are so many strings attached to it that we have not even begun to sort through that. So can you explain how you get all your medical, sorry, move my little thing along. Katarina asks, how you can explain how you get all your medical stuff in Thailand? Do you still get med insurance and pay in pocket? So Thailand, for example, I have a medical insurance policy or travel insurance policy. So for everything that I need, if I needed to go because I tripped and fell or I stepped on some coral or something like that, your insurance will cover you. That being said, medical treatment in Thailand is a lot less expensive. So half the time people just pay because you can go to a clinic and remind your stuff and it's $25 or $50 or something like that. It's almost not even worth it. We have another comment from Jean, Cyprus and Madeira. So I'll be interested to hear this poll because for me, the big question is warm, like tropical warm or temperate climate, what is more important? So it'll be interesting to get that feedback, and I'll be getting that out to all of you with our newsletter. So I put up the question once again of the 4 destinations per day. Oh, sorry, this is a different question. Different question. Which one is least interesting? So feel free, if you didn't like any of them, none of these are of interest, you can put, or you can, you can say which one is of least interest. Again, we want to sort of establish where more interest is. Is it more for the temperate ones because you get a lot of bang for your buck in, a Madeira or a Cyprus, or is it more like, a Thailand or a Costa Rica, warmer destinations, but because it's high season, you're paying a little bit of a premium to it. So please let us know which one are least interesting, or if none of them are of interest. Joel, do we have one more question here? I think we do. Before we wrap up, no, I think that's it. That's all the questions that we have. So we are gradually wrapping up our webinar here today. I thank you all for engaging with me on this chat about long stay vacations. Really, we are a member-driven organization, and I know I harp on that all the time, but all of this feedback that you get, we download it all. We discuss it at our team meetings, and we want to know your opinion, your thoughts, because we try as much as possible to deliver the kind of experience that you want. This is a membership organization. It's all about what our members want. I have lots of great ideas, but if nobody wants to buy them, that doesn't really make any sense. Good. You have compared Madeira to the Azores a few times. Why do you choose a long stay at Madeira? Good question, Ardell. The Azores, and we discussed this the other day, the Azores are spectacular. You'd be bored stiff staying there for a month because the biggest city in the Azores, Ponta Delgada, on the island of São Miguel, is like 25,000 people. And it is dead still in the wintertime because there's hardly any tourism. There's just not that much to do. And although the islands are beautiful, that's why we go for 5 days. You can wonderfully capture the island in 5 or 6 days. To be there for a month, you'd be bored out of your mind. Madeira is much bigger island and just offers so many more things to do. There's just more people, there's more action going on. So that's why we think Madeira is, compared to the Azores, would be a better choice. And yeah, so Fran made a comment. We hope it'll be an option for 2021. This is really one of the big questions we're grappling with. Again, I'd love your input. I know that members have said those that go down south for the winter time. Obviously, there are serious considerations as to whether people will be heading down to the U.S. given the challenges that they're facing down there. And we seriously hope that will get better for them. But I think people are looking further afield. So we are loosely considering whether or not we would run one of these already in this coming winter. We're going to collate our the response that we get. We will probably come up with a sample program by, let's say, around September, and we'll put it out to our membership and say who would want to go this year. And I realize that comes with a lot of question marks about air travel, about everything else. So bear with us on that. We're all waiting to see what happens with travel in the coming months, and we're hopeful that things start to return to normal. So Kendra, by the latest, we'll start in 2022, but it may be as early as this winter. We'll just have to wait and see. So thank you again all for joining us today. It's 1 hour in, so we'll wrap up for now. Please email me, email any of us, either me directly or bookings or info, and we will respond to you. Thank you again for joining us, and look forward to catching up with you Thursday. If you want to hear about yachting in the Turkish Mediterranean, we'll be doing this all again on Thursday at 11 o'clock. So until then, or until I see you next, have yourselves a good week.